who said that the Chinese authorities increasingly know of and cooperate with Chinese organized crime overseas. The Post's investigation centered on Chinese criminal organization activities in Southeast Asia and Africa. Today, I hope to learn how Chinese authorities exploit the presence of Chinese criminal groups in our own hemisphere. China's trade with Latin America has grown significantly in the last 2 decades, from around $12 billion per year in 2000 to about $500 billion today, from 12 to 500 billion in just a short 25 years. Chinese government-linked corporations now control all or part of 40 ports in Latin America, including the mega container port of Chanquete in Peru. These trade flows between China and Latin America can easily hide fentanyl precursors and the illicit wildlife that the drug cartels sometimes pay Chinese criminal organizations with. I'm concerned about a report published this last year by the International Coalition Against Illicit Economies, which warned that the port of Chanquete, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is likely to become a preferred hub of illegal trade. As China expands its control over Latin American ports, it can become increasingly difficult for law enforcement to stop synthetic drug precursors from entering the Western Hemisphere before they're turned into fentanyl and methamphetamine and trafficked across our borders. Sometimes the Chinese government offers Latin American countries assistance in addressing the threat posed by Chinese criminal groups. For example, in the 2010s, the Chinese government assisted the Argentine government multiple times in dismantling Chinese criminal organizations. But when China provides law enforcement assistance to Latin American countries, it does so with its own interests in mind. According to a study published last year by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, China has gained intelligence opportunities by integrating Chinese technicians into foreign countries' security agencies. And we know that China has deployed surveillance technology in at least 12 countries across Latin America and the Caribbean through its, quote, Safe Cities initiative. Today's hearing provides us an opportunity to understand not only the direct threat that Chinese criminal groups pose to our citizens through trafficking poison across our borders, but also the long-term strategic consequences of their presence in Latin America and the Chinese government's response. We have some of the leading experts on Chinese organized crime in Latin America with us here today, and I'm looking forward to a productive discussion. I will say to my friend, Senator Whitehouse, I've already told our witnesses we have some votes scheduled right smack dab in the middle of our hearing, so we'll manage the best we can, but I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Welcome to the witnesses. I appreciate you being here to lend your expertise. As we all know, illicit narcotics often come into the United States by way of international supply chains, whether it's cocaine from South America or heroin from Afghanistan or Asia's Golden Triangle. Today's deadliest scourge, fentanyl, usually begins in Chinese chemical precursor factories before passing through Mexican labs en route usually by land to the United States. Fentanyl and other synthetic opioids can be made just about anywhere with few ingredients, making it hard to locate and dismantle these operations before distribution. Once distributed, a small amount of fentanyl can yield huge profits for cartels while proving deadly for scores of Americans. A single kilo of fentanyl can produce more than 1 million counterfeit pill dosages and generate millions in revenue, meaning an intercepted package or seized supply is a negligible cost of doing business for cartels. But even a single pill laced with fentanyl can be deadly. 329 Rhode Islanders died of drug overdose in 2024 alone. That's an improvement from years past, but it's 329 too many. What this tells us is that standard interdiction and enforcement efforts won't end this crisis. We need a different approach. For every gram of fentanyl sold into America, there's a chemical supply chain. For every dollar made, there's a dollar in revenue that gets back to the cartels. By attacking the chemical supply chain and the money flow, we can dismantle and harm the cartels. The revenue side, like the supply chain, is an international business. Cartels need help covertly moving and spending their money. That's where Chinese criminal organizations come in again. Chinese money laundering organizations have gotten very good at washing cartels' ill-gotten gains. They launder cartel cash quicker and cheaper than competitors, often with a money-back guarantee. For the cartels, it's simple. Input dirty American dollars and output clean American pesos to finance more fentanyl, more weapons, more corruption. It's a cycle we need to disrupt. Money laundering is not the only Chinese organized crime activity. Their activities in Latin America extend beyond narcotics to encompass IUU fishing, wildlife trafficking, human trafficking, and other mischief. How do drug traffickers, kleptocrats, terrorists, and Chinese organized crime groups get away with this and more? One way is opaque free trade zones and trade data that make it easy to launder cash and smuggle contraband like precursor chemicals. The Clean FTZ Act I co-lead with Senator Cassidy would enhance oversight of foreign free trade zones. And our Manifest Modernization Act would shine a light on opaque import records to help law enforcement take down bad actors. Criminal organizations also use the U.S. financial system to run their illicit financial operations. In 2021, then Treasury Secretary Yellen said, "There's a good argument that the best place to hide and launder ill-gotten gains is actually the United States." The U.S. has allowed cartels, terrorists, rogue states, foreign oligarchs, and Chinese money laundering organizations to use phony U.S. shell and front corporations in their illicit schemes. In May, members of a prolific Chinese money laundering organization pled guilty to laundering millions of dollars in narcotics money through various shell companies. This is just the tip of a huge iceberg. Time and time again, we've seen those seeking to harm the United States use opaque corporate structures to cover their tracks and evade detection and accountability. I worked with former Chair Grassley in the first Trump administration to pass the Bipartisan Corporate Transparency Act, which identifies who is behind anonymous corporations used in criminal schemes. But Treasury Secretary Bessent suspended its enforcement for 99% of the entities Congress covered by the law, willfully blinding law enforcement investigating our country's most dangerous threats. Treasury must reverse course and fully implement the CTA as envisioned by Congress. Treasury should also fix money laundering vulnerabilities in the investment and residential real estate sectors by implementing the rules that were finalized last year. The individuals servicing a corrupt money laundering trade under the color of legitimate business should be held accountable for giving aid and comfort to America's enemies. As we close existing loopholes in our anti-money laundering regime, we should ensure we aren't opening new ones. Criminal organizations are increasingly turning to cryptocurrency to move their dirty money. As Congress considers a regulatory framework for digital assets, we must include robust safeguards against money laundering and sanctions evasion. Treasury, DOJ, FinCEN, and other agencies fighting against financial crime and corruption need more resources. I hope we can work in a bipartisan way to make sure they have those resources and that they are not diverted to different priorities. I welcome budding signs of cooperation from Mexico and China. Last year, Chinese authorities arrested an individual who was indicted in the United States for involvement in a money laundering scheme on behalf of the Sinaloa cartel. Last month, China placed export controls on 13 chemical precursors used to manufacture fentanyl. I encourage these steps and hope for further progress. But let's be clear, the urgency of the fentanyl crisis demands that we not solely depend on the goodwill of other countries. We can and must take steps here at home to make our financial sector more transparent, hold money launderers and complicit American professionals to account, and target the revenue and supply chain side of the cartel's deadly business. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'll introduce the witnesses. Leland Lazarus is a Fulbright scholar and studied the Chinese diaspora in Panama. He previously served as Associate Director of National Security at Florida International University's Jack D. Goran Institute for Public Policy. From 2021 to 2022, he served as Special Assistant and Speechwriter to the Commander of SOCOM, U.S. Southern Command. He also served as a Foreign Service Officer for the State Department with assignments in Barbados, China, and Washington, D.C. He's earned the Department of Defense's Joint Civilian Service Commendation Award and State Department's Distinguished Honor Award. Ray Donovan retired in 2023 after 28 years with the Drug Enforcement Agency, concluding his service with the federal government as the Chief of Operations, the DEA's third highest ranking official responsible for overseeing all global enforcement activity. Mr. Donovan previously served as the special agent in charge of the DEA's New York division and led the DEA's Special Operations Division, which is the federal government's central coordination point for all counter-narcotics efforts. Earlier in his distinguished career, he oversaw operations in Mexico and Central America and directed the interagency team that twice captured Sinaloa cartel leader Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. His extensive frontline leadership gives him unique perspective on the intersection of Chinese organized crime, money laundering, and Mexican cartels. Dr. Vanda Felbab Brown is a senior fellow at the Strobe Talbot Center for Security, Strategy, and Technology in the Foreign Policy Program at the Brookings Institution. She's a director of the Initiative on Non-State Armed Actors and the co-director of the Africa Security Initiative and the Brookings series, The Opioid Crisis in America, Domestic and International Dimensions. Dr. Felbab Brown has conducted extensive field work across regions, including Afghanistan, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Africa, and she served as a senior advisor to the congressionally mandated Afghanistan Peace Process Study Group. Dr. Felbab Brown has authorized several books and numerous policy reports on topics like organized crime, conflict, and drug policy. So why don't we start with opening statements, please? We have your copy of your written remarks, which will be made part of the record. And Mr. Lazarus, why don't we start with you?
Chairman Cornyn, Co-Chair White House, and distinguished members of the caucus, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. And thank you for taking on what I believe is one of the most urgent and least understood national security challenges facing U.S.-China relations. Chinese global criminal networks are a direct threat to the American people. Chinese criminality deserves to be taken as seriously as fentanyl, trade, Taiwan, semiconductors, rare earths, and AI. And I urge President Trump to address Chinese criminality with Xi Jinping during his visit to Beijing in April 2026. Because if we really want to destroy narco-terrorists, we have to destroy the Chinese criminals, providing them a financial lifeline. For years, when I was at U.S. Southern Command, we treated China and transnational criminal organizations as largely two distinct threats. But that world is long gone. Today, the evidence is very clear. Chinese criminal networks are building a Silk Road of crime that stretches from Fujian province to Flushing, Queens, New York, San Gabriel Valley, California, and beyond. And it runs straight through the Western Hemisphere. These networks are not just abstract geopolitical risks. Their illicit products are poisoning Americans. They laundered $312 billion over the past 4 years for Mexican cartels and wealthy Chinese individuals. And they're doing it at a scale and speed we have never seen before. The fentanyl crisis in the United States cannot be solved without understanding Chinese criminal networks. But their crimes don't just stop at fentanyl. Chinese crime networks touch almost every illicit economy in our hemisphere. Synthetic drugs, money and crypto laundering, illegal mining, illegal marijuana trafficking in various states here in the US, wildlife trafficking, human smuggling, and cyber pig butchering scams. Now, I want to be clear. I have seen no direct evidence that Xi Jinping is calling gangsters to direct their activities. But in a techno-authoritarian system where corruption is common, criminals don't need orders to align with Beijing's interests, especially when doing so earns them protection and opportunity. Let me highlight two cases. Senator, you mentioned Zhi Dongzhang, known as Brother Wang. He was a Fujianese narcotics broker whose network connected Chinese chemical suppliers to Mexican cartels. He fled Mexico, tried to enter Russia and was turned away, was arrested in Cuba, and was ultimately extradited to the United States. His operation spanned 100 shell companies and 170 bank accounts across Mexico, various US states, and China. Another example is Di Zishi, a Chinese businessman and alleged criminal in Paraguay who claimed to act as a proxy for Beijing, taking orders from the nearby Chinese embassy in Brazil to try to bribe local Paraguayan officials to break ties with Taiwan. So what do we do to deal with this threat? First, we must pressure China to crack down not just on fentanyl, but also on money laundering, crypto scams, illegal marijuana farms, and other illicit activities that are threatening Americans. If Beijing refuses, we must use tariffs to raise the cost of inaction. Second, we need an interagency task force focused specifically on Chinese organized crime. And we must build on Project Sleeping Giant, a whole-of-government effort integrating DEA, FBI, DHS, Treasury, and intelligence community. Third, we need an international coalition from Taiwan to Australia to Latin America, all sharing intelligence, sharing Mandarin and Fujianese translators, and best practices. Fourth, we need to use AI to map out these networks. And my team is building an AI-powered dragon tracker that would illuminate routes, shell companies, money flows, and connections to CCP entities. Fifth, we must strengthen outreach to educate key Chinese diaspora communities and Chinese students about the dangers of Chinese criminals and the Chinese state exploiting them. The bottom line is this: Chinese criminal networks are undermining the security of the United States today, and we have to treat it with the urgency it deserves. We must sever the Silk Road of crime to protect our citizens, our communities, and our hemisphere. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lazarus. You did a better job than I did pronouncing some of those names. With a name like mine, I'm sensitive to that, but Mr. Donovan, we'll hear from you now.
Good afternoon, Chairman Corden, Co-Chair White House, and distinguished members of the International Narcotics Control Committee. My name is Ray Donovan. I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify before you today on the alarming role that the Chinese organized crime plays in Latin America and the influence that the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party have in fueling the Western Hemisphere's fentanyl and methamphetamine crisis. I'm currently the CEO of Stack 21 Solutions, an investigative consulting firm that delivers trusted intelligence to manage security and regulatory risk, specifically as it pertains to anti-money laundering and anti-drug trafficking. As the Chairman Corner mentioned, after serving 28 years with DEA, I retired in 2023 as the Chief of Operations, the third highest ranking official in DEA, prior to overseeing all enforcement operations worldwide. I served as a special agent in charge in DEA New York Division, the administration's flagship office and central inflection point for many global narco-terrorism cases. Prior to New York, I was a special agent in the DEA Special Operations Division, the central hub for deconfliction and coordination for all counter-narcotics operations run across law enforcement, military, intelligence community, and foreign partners. Prior to running the SOD, I led the interagency team that twice captured the by developing and executing a successful whole-of-government approach supported by strong international partnerships. My extensive experience as a special agent and leader in both DEA and the private sector has afforded me a well-rounded perspective of Chinese organized crime in Latin America and the PRC and CCP's involvement in illicit global drug trade. For decades, I have witnessed China's governing bodies systemically targeting global financial networks and contribute heavily to the synthetic narcotics epidemic by funding precursor chemicals manufacturing, incentivizing fentanyl exportation, and enacting policies that aid in success of global drug trade. China's coordinated efforts are strategic and aggressive interference in American democracy. Until we adjust our approach to this national security threat, this cycle of criminality will continue to tear at the social and economic fabric of American society through the abuse of our people and our banks. To gain geopolitical influence with foreign governments in key areas of global supply chain, the PRC and the CCP fund infrastructure and systems in pivotal areas using the Belt and Road Initiative. Simultaneously, members of Chinese organized crime open quasi-legitimate businesses across the Western Hemisphere to include money exchange houses, casinos, import and export companies, and mining and chemical businesses that often serve as front companies for money laundering operations. In Latin America specifically, the Chinese influence grew exponentially when their primary business shifted from laundering money from cocaine trafficking for Colombian cartels to providing synthetic chemical precursors for methamphetamine and fentanyl production for Mexican cartels. Demand in the U.S. surged due to the unprecedented addictive nature of these drugs, which created the opportunity for this shift to take place and for Chinese manufacturers to position themselves as essential players in the illicit global drug trade. Synthetic narcotics production provides a clear economic advantage over traditional plant-based materials like coca leaves or opium poppy paste, which guarantees faster, cheaper, and more reliable mass production for the cartels. With the promise of larger yields, with less overhead and fewer production variables, these chemicals quickly became one of the main exports of China to the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. In tandem with the Chinese organized crime's growing influence due to chemical precursors development, China's strict capital flight policies create a significant opportunity for the global illicit drug trade to flourish. These restrictions limit the amount of cash wealthy Chinese individuals and businesses can legally move outside the country, forcing them to seek unregulated, illegal methods to acquire U.S. dollars and foreign assets. This demand is met through a black market system of brokers and mirrors transactions where Chinese nationals purchase illicit cash derived primarily from illicit drug sales, such as fentanyl, methamphetamine, and black market marijuana, to purchase luxury goods, real estate, and other valuable assets. The fees paid to navigate these channels provide Chinese organized crime groups with consistent flow of money and steady mechanisms to launder their profits that would otherwise not exist without the capital flight policies. This symbiotic and toxic relationship is a classic example of supply and demand. The policies create the demand, and the Chinese organized criminal groups meet the supply to secure illicit financial flows that ultimately fund and empower continued international narcotics trafficking. International pressure for prevention and regulation have proved unsuccessful time and time again. From 2016 to as recent as last month, the PRC and the CCP introduced regulatory law to monitor the production and exportation of synthetic precursors and narcotics, while also incentivizing and profiting from the same chemical companies they claim to control. According to the Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the U.S. and CCP, the PRC directly subsidized export of 97% of fentanyl precursors to Mexico, which are then manufactured and fentanyl trafficked to the United States. And the PRC ranking members of CCP hold ownership interest in the sum of those chemical companies, which receive 13% tax rebate for fentanyl exportation outside of China. In addition to former U.S. Treasury Department investigator John Caceres testified in a statement to the Cullen Commission of Inquiry into Money Laundering in British Columbia that money laundering schemes involving Chinese government officials and the CCP elite members exploited a landscape where $3.8 trillion in capital left China from 2006 to 2016, making China, quote, the world's top exporter of hot money. What these findings prove is that the Chinese government's lack of enforcement is intentional. While creating the illusion of cooperation, they are tied directly to manufacturing, distributing, and profiting from 97% synthetic narcotics precursor chemicals that are responsible for the deadliest drug epidemic in our nation's history. It is my testimony that PRC will respond to any pressure by continuing to enact empty laws while Chinese organized criminal groups operate in the shadows. Their stake in the global illicit drug trade is too fruitful for their economy, and in some cases, their personal financial gains. To truly end the assault on American lives, our counter-response must focus on one aspect that criminal organizations rely on and cannot evade to conduct their business: financial institutions. I have had the honor of serving in senior positions under both Republican and Democratic administrations. I can attest that this is not a question of politics. It is a question of national security. We must all come together to combat the narcotics threat coming from well-established Chinese organized criminal groups in the Western Hemisphere and the policies enacted by the PRC and CCP that enable the exportation of deadly chemicals and fuel the global Chinese underground banking industry. I would like to thank Chairman Cornyn and Co-Chair Whitehouse and the committee for the opportunity to share the information surrounding these deadly threats. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Feldman Brown.
Chairman Cornyn, Co-Chair White House, thank you for this opportunity to testify. I'm a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and I have been studying Chinese criminal networks operating in drugs, wildlife trafficking, logging, mining, money laundering since 2008, and extensively written about those issues in books and articles. The Brookings Institution is a U.S. nonprofit organization devoted to high-quality independent research and policy solutions. My testimony represents solely my personal views and does not reflect the views of Brookings, its other scholars, employees, officers, or trustees. As we have heard, over the past 2 decades, Chinese actors have expanded their illicit economies in Latin America and the Caribbean. They often take advantage of Chinese legal businesses, which have also expanded in the region. The presence of Chinese criminal groups has grown extensively, and there is a wide variety of those groups that operate in the Western Hemisphere. Their criminal activities span a wide spectrum of crimes, which I detail in my written testimony, in addition to drug trafficking and money laundering, extortion, human smuggling, illegal fishing, logging, mining, and wildlife trafficking. Chinese drug trafficking networks also continue to be the principal suppliers of precursors for synthetic drugs such as fentanyl and methamphetamine to Mexican cartels. And as Senator Cornyn has pointed out, they have become the to-go money launderers for these entities. Like other criminal groups in the region, their illicit economies represent multifaceted threats and harms that threaten the rule of law, economic well-being and sustainability, biodiversity and environmental conservation, public health and public security. But they are not major sources of violence in Latin America. Mostly they operate through corruption and often party protection. And indeed, unlike other criminal actors in the hemisphere, some Chinese criminal groups and activities also serve to advance the interest, the diplomatic influence and economic interest of the Chinese government. This limits the willingness of the Chinese government to counter such corrupt practices and illegality. But it is important to note that illicit activities in the region are not solely perpetrated by outright criminal groups. They are frequently also perpetrated by Chinese legal companies that employ corruption and act in violations of laws and regulations indifferent to their harmful effects. Various non-Chinese businesses in the region, of course, also engage in such activities. But the size of China's trade with the region, the size of China's demand for Latin American natural resources make the impact of their illicit behavior particularly pronounced. And an extensive presence of Chinese companies in Latin American ports that sometimes often fails to implement transparency and accountability principles and diligent and unbiased application of rule of law generates further risks. Yet at the same time, China is actively expanding its law enforcement assistance programs in the region. The law enforcement is often skewed, one-sided, and self-serving. Chinese anti-crime technologies, such as Huawei's safe cities, pose risks of human rights violations, of enhancing repression, and serving as backdoor for espionage. Yet, within this highly complex system, there are also many opportunities to counter Chinese criminal networks, and indeed to even productively engage the government of China in such efforts. I lay them out in detail in my written testimony. They include helping state authorities to develop law enforcement tools against Chinese networks specifically, encouraging the adoption of US law enforcement assistance and anti-crime measures, technologies, port monitoring systems, dismantling Chinese money laundering networks, but crucially, countering the illicit economies beyond drugs. Looking at the illicit economies in environmental crime creates many opportunities that requires building clean, transparent, and traceable supply chains. Equally important is reducing corruption and patronage system within Latin America by helping to build and support apolitical, independent legal systems, independent inspectors, and investigative journalists. All of this, of course, must take place in the context of scrupulously adhering to human rights and civil liberties and holding all law enforcement forces accountable. Finally, the United States will fail in its external support if it does not strengthen its own resources, institutions, and laws for enabling such support in Latin America. Those include diligent applications of the Foreign Corruption Practices Act, the Lacey Act, the Corporate Transparency Act, and preservation of institutions such as organized crime and drug enforcement task forces or their equivalents.
Thank you very much. I'm going to defer to Senator Whitehouse first while I go vote, and I'll be back shortly.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you. My background is that I was Rhode Island's United States Attorney and our Attorney General, and worked in the Attorney General's office beforehand in a state where one of just a few states in which the Attorney General has the full panoply of criminal authority. We didn't have DAs. The AG did it all. So my experience was very much dealing with the contraband aspect of the drug trafficking loop. And there weren't very many people who were very capable at examining the financial part of the cartel's business loop. And there wasn't a great deal of information on how you traced it and what were the mechanisms through which these cartels, which make the kind of revenues that small countries have, how do they hide and dispose of all of their ill-gotten gains? If you don't mind, this is just obviously going to be a complete ballpark number, but compared to a perfect understanding of the financial operation of the drug cartels, how far are we along? If that was 100%, where are we in American law enforcement?
Senator, so let me understand your question correctly. So where are we in federal law enforcement in regards to?
Understanding the financial arrangements and the money laundering arrangements and the hidden investment arrangements of the cartels. Are we 10% of the way there, 90% of the way there, 50% of the way there?
And this is just my opinion. I think that
opinion.
Just my opinion. My opinion is that in law enforcement, we are so laser focused on going after, especially in DEA, going after the actual drug
the contraband
smuggling,
itself.
the contraband itself. The money laundering aspect has, over time, has lessened as far as the ability to pursue money laundering networks. It's decreased. It hasn't increased.
Yeah.
From 2004.
We've heard the same thing, by the way, from other DEA witnesses, that we're actually backsliding away from having the capability to understand the financial side.
That's correct. And I think with digital currency now, it's even more challenging for law enforcement to get after that problem.
But the money has to go someplace.
That's right.
And so it remains a live target, even as the contraband gets distributed out to users. It's the funding that actually comes back and gathers. Did you have a guesstimate on where we are on that?
Well, Senator Whitehouse, I mean, on one hand, I'm heartened by the recent report from the U.S. Treasury's FinCEN, really laying out the specific ways in which Chinese criminal money laundering networks are what their modus operandi is, right? They're leveraging sometimes Chinese students in order to help them open up bank accounts. And sometimes the Chinese students who are here in the United States don't necessarily know that they are supporting criminal activities. They're also leveraging what they call daigou, which are purchasing agents in order to help them buy real estate on their behalf or to, again, open up bank accounts. So we know the how, but I think there needs to be more focus on what do we do about it? And I think that's exactly why we've got to create a interagency task force specifically focused on this, right? We had, of course, which Ray led, Project Sleeping Giant in 2018. I understand that there's another Department of Justice initiative to specifically go after the digital scam farms that have swindled, $16 billion out of everyday Americans.
Let me give Dr. Feldbaum Brown a chance to give me her number on how far. You didn't have one. What's your number on roughly where we are on the way to a coherent, complete understanding of the financial side of the cartel operation? So we're not even close, really.
20 years ago, I would be surprised if we have seen an improvement in an order of magnitude.
If you follow Mr. Donovan's testimony, we've backslid, and other DEA agents have confirmed that. So last question. You've written, Ms. Feldbaum Brown, about the role of Chinese fishing fleets as they go around. I think a lot of my colleagues think of that as, well, they're just out fishing. Are they just out fishing? What are they doing?
Well, they are fishing in extraordinarily destructive ways that gravely impact livelihoods of coastal communities, that can destroy food security system, including those that head to the United States, and they have a potentially very severe economic impact on national economies, all of which generates interest in countries in Latin America and other parts of the world, like U.S., like Asia, to have U.S. cooperation in countering that, such as through Coast Guard agreement. But Chinese vessels, like many other illegally operating vessels, have also been detected to smuggle drugs, potentially smuggling precursors as well. And I think we should be concerned and interested whether they serve espionage purposes as well. In some cases, we are talking about flotillas of 300, 500 ships that stay at sea for months, even years on, without docking in a port. But they come very close to exclusive economic zones or, in fact, enter them. A lot of focus has been paid to balloons linked to China and espionage, while these Chinese flotillas can potentially carry a lot more sustained espionage equipment than even the balloons. So paying close attention to countering IUU fishing generates a lot of information and intelligence opportunities in some of the most sensitive domains.
Thank you. Senator. You were here first. I'll let you guys sort it out.
Getting organized. Well, thank you. I appreciate it very much. Thank you for being here. I'll ask the three of you, to start with you, Mr. Lazarus. Would you consider these drug cartels a clear and present danger to the United States of America?
Senator, 100%, and in multiple ways. It's not just the deadly fentanyl precursors, but the fact that they've been able to exploit our U.S. financial system, right? $312 billion over the past 4 years laundered through our U.S. financial system. It's this idea of what they call crime convergence, right? Where one group is engaged in a whole host of different criminal activities. I think for so long we focused on sort of each criminal activity separate without realizing that actually a lot of these criminal networks are engaged in all of it. So I think it's a direct threat to the American people. And I think that's why President Trump should absolutely bring this up to Xi Jinping when he visits Beijing in April of next year.
So they are a clear and present danger to the United States, and obviously having them in our neighborhood in Latin America, what does that do to those countries? In other words, is it possible for these countries in Latin America to have these international criminal gangs that are making billions of dollars? Is it possible for those narco-terrorists to exist in those countries and have those countries have legitimate economies?
It is not possible, Senator, because this is further exacerbating corruption that's already so endemic in many of our allies and partners in Latin America and the Caribbean. With many of the clients that I work with in U.S. government, U.S. Southern Command, Special Operations Command South, they're seeing an increase in Chinese criminal individuals who tend to also have ties with the local Chinese embassies in those countries. They tend to lead various illicit activities as well. And so this is a way in which, again, there's a nexus between Chinese criminality and the potential way in which the CCP or CCP elements may be leveraging Chinese criminality in order to further their foreign policy goals in the Western Hemisphere.
Thank you. Mr. Donovan, same first question to you. Are they a clear and present danger to the United States of America?
Yes, Senator, they are.
And can you talk about a little bit of how they've intertwined themselves into both the air quote legitimate economy and also into political corruption in these countries in Latin America?
Sure, absolutely. So first off, it is clear and present danger because of the number of overdose deaths since 2015 and because of the synthetics that are being produced in China and shipped to Mexico for trafficking into the United States. It's no longer business as usual. And so we do see the intercrossing of both commercial industries and illicit industries as it relates to certainly chemicals and financial institutions throughout Latin America. We see CCP and PRC working directly with Chinese criminal groups that exist in Mexico to bring those chemicals in, help production of fentanyl and methamphetamine, and then directing those drugs towards our country.
Yeah,
so,
and again, and also political corruption in those countries, right? Because obviously the amount of money that you're talking about can easily influence elections, correct?
That is correct. And one of the biggest issues that I've seen in my 28 years of service as it relates to the drug industry at large is corruption.
Right. And Mrs. Feldbach-Brown, how do you see it? Do you think these narco-terrorists are a clear and present danger to America?
Yes, they are.
And do you think that it's wise that we give them the opportunity to make billions of dollars trafficking humans across our border?
I don't think it's wise to do that at all. I equally don't think that it's wise to give them any opportunities to engage in corruption by weakening our anti-corruption structure systems or ignoring their activities in issues like environmental crime.
But they did make billions of dollars in bringing people into the U.S. illegally. Is that not accurate? And that strengthens these organizations. So you have, I think it was Mr. Lazarus said it well, you have this intertwining of traditional drug dealing, money laundering, but now this huge business of human trafficking, child trafficking, sex trafficking relies on a porous border to the U.S. Is that not accurate?
That is indeed a lot of human trafficking across the border. Chinese criminal groups are involved in it. I do not have the size of the number. Is it billions, hundreds of millions? I cannot answer that.
Do you regret being against President Trump's border wall and not being stronger and saying that we should end illegal migration into America, which, by the way, we've not allowed a single human being into this country illegally since May, with no new legislation. We just had a president that enforced those laws, and you were actively against the border wall. You called it a gigantic waste of time. Do you regret those comments now seeing the success of a secure border?
No, I do not. I think that the border wall comes with many downsides, and clearly massive reduction in illegal migration has been accomplished in the absence of the border being any more completed than then.
So you don't think that the border wall was the reason why we have zero illegal migration since May?
I don't think that the wall is the principal cause of that, no.
So what would be the principal cause of that in your mind?
I think it's other policies of the Trump administration, increase security measures in legal ports of entry. Those policies are, in my view, more important drivers.
Okay. Well, yeah, I would encourage you to talk to the Border Patrol agents who think otherwise. Thank you. Turn it over to Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Donovan, in your time at the DEA, did you work on money laundering cases specifically related to drug traffickers and cartels?
yes, I did, sir.
You know, for years, I've been critical of the Department of Justice for its failure to prosecute banks and executives that have allegedly been involved with money laundering. I still believe that as long as bad people find a way to make a dollar and they only get a fine when they get caught doing those things in America, it's like a tax. If they're going to get fined $1 million, they just need to make $2 million, and they're still making money. So I see it as a problem, regardless of who the president is. In my time looking at this, I've not seen any president that has done one bit of good for the American people in this space. I mean, someone just got pardoned for pleading guilty to moving a bunch of drugs. And this president said, nah, you're all right, man. I mean, I think we're going to do something, we should do something and hold people accountable. Now, based on your experience at the DEA, do you think that Department of Justice adequately prioritized prosecuting financial institutions and those involved that work for those financial institutions for money laundering?
So I do think that DOJ, U.S. Treasury, certain components in DOJ, law enforcement like DEA and FBI, prioritize going after financial institutions to the degree that they can. And if you allow me to elaborate. Often would be the case that when a money laundering investigation is launched, it's at the retail level. That's the access point, the actual bank level. Where we see complicity is often at that level. The challenge to really go after an institution is there are many layers in between the complicit employee all the way up to the board level and the executives. I'm not saying that there isn't a push to do that or there shouldn't be a push to do that. I do think that it is a complex sort of investigation that would have to take a whole of government approach, not only because of the limited access and data that law enforcement agencies have, they would have to work with other components within the government to pursue that. Okay,
Mr.
one of the real issues today.
Let me ask you a follow-up there, though. With the cases that you worked on, was there ever someone from a bank involved in any of the cases that you investigated?
Yes, absolutely.
Were they prosecuted?
Yes, they were.
And they were found guilty?
Yes, they were.
I appreciate that. I just don't see this a lot. As a matter of fact, a lot of these banks, they have to come up with something called the SARS, a report of, what is it, Sheldon? Suspicious activity. And those SARS reports go and they die on a desk somewhere. As a matter of fact, Treasury doesn't even like to share them with members of Congress. I'm hoping we can change this. I just have a lot of questions about this with a lot of folks that get off. And so that's where my questions have been in that space. Now, Ms. Felbab? Ms. Felbab-Brown have decentralized cryptocurrency services. So decentralized cryptocurrency, very technical term. Illicit financing, people are more familiar with that. I call it closing loopholes that terrorists and cartels use. So I'm going to use that term instead of using decentralized services. Have they been used by any of these entities in illicit finance?
Absolutely. Cryptocurrencies are being used as one of the premier mechanisms for criminal actors, including Chinese criminal actors, to launder illicit proceeds.
So if Congress advances legislation addressing this industry, right now it's called market structure, another term that not a lot of people are familiar with, but it's called market structure. Should legislation that closes loopholes that let terrorists and cartels play in this space, in the decentralized space, be included or excluded from that legislation?
It should absolutely be included.
What are the risks of exempting closing loopholes that terrorists and drug cartels use in this space?
Well, obviously, broadly, the risks are this will gravely jeopardize U.S. security and the well-being of U.S. companies and individuals. But I think there is also a particular danger that Chinese criminal groups and Russian criminal groups will be well-positioned to dominate a lot of the crypto laundering space.
I appreciate that. Now, Mr. Lazarus, you mentioned something about the Chinese or the exploitation of the American financial system. The name of this hearing is includes us looking into Chinese money laundering organizations, CMLOs, if I have the acronym correct. Do those entities use American financial institutions to launder money?
Absolutely, Senator. Absolutely. And, the Treasury, FinCEN, said that they've laundered $312 billion
that they know of
in our U.S. financial system over the past 4 years alone.
And is it fair to say that they know of That the federal
That they
agencies
know of.
correct,
That's
sir?
right, that they know of, yes.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
While we wait for the chairman to return, let me ask each of you about the role of corruption in protecting the business model of these cartels. Let me start with you, Ms. Brown. How important to the business model?
Sorry, was the question directed to
how
me?
Yes. How important to the cartel's business model is atmosphere of corruption?
It is absolutely fundamental. It is the essential ingredient that allows for organized crime to thrive at large levels.
Mr. Donovan?
I second that, sir. Corruption is the backbone of the drug cartels, not only in Mexico, but in other countries where illicit narcotics are produced. It's also the backbone behind the precursor chemical industry in China as well.
Mr. Lazarus?
Senator, I agree 100%. Corruption is fundamental in their modus operandi. That's why I wonder if one of the ways in which we can try to get after this too is, the State Department has already put visa revocations on individuals in Central America who have been engaged in corruption with CCP entities in Central America. I wonder if we can expand that throughout the entire Western Hemisphere, including the Caribbean and South America, so that we can stop and actually impose costs on individuals who are receiving money from CCP elements and Chinese criminals.
So, question to all of you, again, a relatively short answer, I expect. If we were going to take deliberate and aggressive steps to go after the financial side of the cartel's business model, those steps should include an element that looks at the use of cartel revenues to foster the corruption that is essential to their business model. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes, sir.
Indeed, and I think it should focus on all manner of corruption, not simply that originating in criminal entities.
Expand on, what did you mean by that?
Because legal businesses that are not called triads, that are not called tongues, that are not called cartels, also engage in corruption.
Got
and
it.
they provide mechanisms for both the illicit activity and for the larger enabling environment.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Lazarus, you, in your opening statement, you said there were no direct ties between the cartels or the Chinese criminal organizations and the government of the Chinese Communist Party and President Xi. But it looks to me like there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that if they don't directly participate, they certainly turn a blind eye, maybe worse. Could you expand on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Senator. I think that there's growing evidence and growing examples all throughout the world of Chinese individuals who engage in illicit activities who also have ties to CCP elements. The most famous example is Wan Kuokoi, who's based in Southeast Asia, who's head of the World Hongmen Brotherhood Association, but is also head of the 14K Triads. There is somebody like a Wan Kuokoi.
And just to be clear, the 14K Triad is one of the largest criminal organizations in China.
That's correct.
In China.
That is correct. What we're seeing is that there is someone like a Wan Kuokoi in several countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. One of them was the gentleman I mentioned in my opening statement, Dizish, over in Paraguay, an alleged criminal who was taking orders from the Chinese embassy in Brazil, neighboring Brazil, to try to corrupt local officials, to try to get them to break ties with Taiwan. There are examples in the Caribbean, in Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago, of a similar pattern. In Chile as well, similar pattern. So while there are no direct ties to say that, at the highest levels, Xi Jinping isn't, talking to one of these gangsters in order to direct their actions, there is growing examples, growing elements of this nexus between Chinese criminality and CCP elements. And I think we need to have a more fuller picture, a more fuller research of this happening in the United States, in the Western Hemisphere, and really around the world.
And I'd like Mr. Donovan, Dr. Feldbach-Brown, for you to respond to this. To the extent that Chinese have commercial interests in Latin America, do those provide opportunities both for espionage and for other criminal activity? For example, we talked about the ports, which are so critical. In the recent past, I've become very concerned about some of the cranes, for example, that are manufactured in China that have this black box that can't be opened, and many serious concerns about using that for surveillance of various types. But could you comment on the confluence or the overlap between Chinese commercial activities in Latin America and concerns about either criminal organizations or intelligence gathering operations?
Yes, Senator. In the last 20 years, we've seen the growth of Chinese influence, specifically in Mexico and Central America, as it relates to international commercial industries such as mining companies, money exchange houses, casinos, import-export businesses. We know plenty about the ports, but there's so much more activity taking place in the Western Hemisphere than ever before. Where it crosses over is we often see these criminal elements as well as these intel operations that cross into Belt and Road initiatives through business associations. That's where we see the area where they come together. So that has continued and will continue to be an issue for us in the Western Hemisphere.
Dr. Feldbach-Brown?
Various aspects of Chinese economic activities involve illegality. And once again, this doesn't have to be perpetrated by outright criminal groups. Conversely, large Chinese criminal groups such as 14K that has been mentioned multiple times, other groups like the Fujian Mafia operate large businesses in legal commodities, in legal services. So the intermingling of non-transparent supply chains, non-transparent systems with technologies, with already corrupt environment provides multitude opportunities for legal businesses to foster criminality and for criminality to foster nefarious activities of the government of China or other Chinese actors.
Let me turn to Senator Moreno for other questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for having the hearing. Mr. Donovan, I'm going to go back to a point we made a little bit earlier. You have extensive experience at the DEA. It's fair to say that this is not new information for you. You've lived it on the ground. How would you characterize the 4 years of the Biden administration from the lens of the drug cartels? Good times, bad times, same?
So in the DEA, while I was in the DEA, I was the chief of operations under the Biden administration. We did our job, followed the mission, and continued to pursue the drug cartels. One of the biggest wins that we got during that time frame was the focus in on the Chapitos. We identified the Chapitos as the main perpetrators of production of fentanyl inside of Mexico, and we were able to pursue them, eventually bringing 2 of them to justice, and then stemming the flow and production of fentanyl from that point on. That was a change that took place under that administration that has carried forward into the Trump administration.
Yeah, but how about when it comes to human trafficking across our border? They made a decent chunk of change, billions of dollars doing that, no?
So human trafficking is another revenue stream for the cartels. So the cartels control the plazas in and out of the United States. There's no question that they benefit from human trafficking.
But I'm just trying to get a sense of quantifying that. Have you ever seen that level of human trafficking on our southern border?
In my time, no.
Okay.
I did not.
So record amount, which by the way is now, let me just emphasize, 0, which I think would be hard to believe, Mr. Chairman. I think if you actually talked to people a year ago and said, we're going to drive down the number of illegals entering this country to 0, I don't think that would have been believable, and yet that has been achieved. So in the people that were coming across, millions and millions and millions of people, I don't think that is, I hope, not a disputed fact for many of you. When you think about the millions of people that came across, did terrorists come across the border, you think, Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Lazarus, did people who were in gangs come across our southern border?
Yes, Senator.
Give 1, 2, 10. Like, what is your estimate? Because obviously they don't self-identify when they cross the border. What do you think? I mean, what's that? Give me the magnitude of what occurred during those 4 years.
You know, I think with regard to the increase of Chinese irregular migration in particular, you know, the good news is, of course, that Ecuador has stopped the visa-free travel for illegal Chinese migrants.
I'm talking about the 4 years of Biden for a second.
You know, I think that there's I think there was a lot of irregular migration going on over those 4 years, sir.
So it's a huge, huge number of criminals, gang members, terrorists that were crossing our border. We found many, I think 300, 400 that were on our terror watch list. And Dr. Feldman-Brown, I'm just confused why you would say a year ago that President Trump was making false statements that Biden was allowing, your words, criminals and terrorists to cross our border. You thought that was a false statement? Do you stand by that that's a false statement, that Biden didn't let in terrorists and criminals?
Well, I certainly think that the Biden administration tried to prevent those individuals from going in. And in the
They tried to prevent those people coming in by letting tens of millions of people cross our border illegally?
Well, I don't think that the Biden administration was letting people cross illegally. It was clearly struggling with massive amount of undocumented irregular migration flows, among which criminal individuals might very well have been present. But I do not believe that the Biden administration simply allowed them to enter.
Gotcha. So it's just coincidental that tens of millions of people crossed our border during their administration and zero have crossed now since Trump. That was just completely by happenstance and coincidence?
No, I don't think that was by happenstance.
Well, then, but then you can't have it both ways. So either the Biden administration enabled the largest human trafficking operation in the history of the world, or they didn't. But the facts are unfortunately unpleasant things. Mr. Chairman, we had a hearing at our Homeland Security Committee meeting in February. And my colleagues brought in a Democrat witness that said that the Remain in Mexico policy was a failed policy and would never work, that it would give a temporary drop in border crossings. And yet what we've seen is that it did the exact opposite. President Trump's policies have worked from extreme border protection to the border wall itself, to policies that enforce our laws. And the reason this matters with what we're talking about here with criminal organization and drug trafficking is that all these things are related. This isn't one enterprise that talks about bringing and smuggling humans. This is a vertically integrated organization that also includes, by the way, like I said earlier, legitimate businesses that make products that they send to America undercut American companies' pricing because they're laundering tens of, not hundreds of millions of dollars in ill-gotten gains. And to say that the Biden administration didn't do that is just, I don't even know how you can say that with a straight face. What happened during the last 4 years is a total and complete disgrace. And if we don't just acknowledge that, and by the way, thank the Lord that the election went differently, because God knows what the borders would have done if she had become president of the United States. And what we have now is a president that's not willing to let Americans die, that is going to kill drug traffickers, no matter how they come to us, because they are a clear and present danger to the United States of America. I don't understand where the hand-wringing comes in. We have a great neighborhood in the Americas. The Western Hemisphere is a great place, and we need to finally pay attention and protect the Western Hemisphere, and that's exactly what we're doing. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back to you. Thank you for having this hearing. And I think we should have clear eyes about what the difference are in actual policies, because we had many times when our Democrat colleagues would say, oh, we need comprehensive immigration reform. We need a bill to stop this flow of migration. No, we didn't. We needed one thing. a president that actually cared about stopping this and actually enforced our laws. And that's why we've had 0 illegal entries into this country. It's not irregular, Mr. Lazarus. This is a PC-free zone. It's not irregular. You're either allowed to enter the country or not allowed to enter the country. And if you're not allowed to enter your country, you're here illegally. So it's illegal migration. Let's just be crystal clear what that is.
Mr. Lazarus, in fiscal year 2023 and 2024, speaking of border crossings, we saw a spike in the number of Chinese nationals illegally crossing the southern border. I can remember being with the Border Patrol during a night patrol where 2 Chinese individuals with Chinese passports were detained. And I asked myself and my colleagues who were there, I said, I wonder what they're going to be doing once they're released into the interior of the United States. I don't know whether they claimed asylum or whether they paroled, but what does life look like for a Chinese migrant who unlawfully crosses the border in the United States?
No, thank you for that question, Senator. Well, the good news is, as I mentioned in July of last year, Ecuador, which was really the main source of where a lot of the illegal Chinese migrants were entering, was able to shut that down, not allow visa-free travel for Chinese migrants. And so the number of illegal Chinese migrants that have crossed the border has dropped precipitously, both because of that and, of course, because of President Trump's border policy as well. What does it look like once they get across the border? I mean, some of them, I think the vast majority of them, Senator, work in restaurants or certain areas, key Chinese diasporic areas in Flushing, Queens, or in San Gabriel Valley, California. But unfortunately, some of them have been exploited by Chinese criminal networks, especially the ones that have illegal marijuana farms in Oklahoma and Maine and Northern California and some other areas. And we have seen through reporting, through journalist articles, the horrid conditions some of them have had to endure, working multiple hours, being basically forced labor. If they're a female worker, they might be subjected to sexual violence. And so it becomes a forced labor and a human rights issue, and really another reason why we need to get after these Chinese criminal networks that are operating here in the United States.
So I don't know how we could actually quantify what percentage of these individuals who came across the border are working in restaurants or some other legitimate business, and how many are ultimately working in some sort of criminal enterprise or become victims themselves, as you said. Mr. Donovan, given your vast experience with the Drug Enforcement Administration, do you have concerns that some of these individuals, particularly the Chinese nationals who come across or end up working in marijuana farms in places like Maine and Oklahoma, or in some other aspect of the illegal drug trade here in the United States?
Senator, I have concerns. As it relates to Chinese organized crime, criminal groups in the United States at large, I think they are amongst the biggest, most profound national security threat facing the nation as it relates to drug trafficking, money laundering, intelligence gathering throughout the U.S. I think our banking institutions are at risk. I think our economic and social fabric of America is at risk. I constantly think about how they're capable of doing this. WeChat is a communication application that we finally have to do something in a bipartisan way to go after that communication app that allows them to launder billions of dollars from the United States throughout the world, but also to share intelligence on American societies.
Is WeChat encrypted?
Yes, it is. End-to-end encryption. There's nothing that U.S. law enforcement can do to get after it, but it is a major problem for us in our national security.
So let me follow up, Mr. Donovan. I think most of us in the Senate or in the Congress are familiar with something called civil-military fusion. In other words, under Chinese laws, any information that is in the possession of a commercial entity has to be shared as a matter of Chinese law with the military and presumably the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. Do you believe that the same sort of information sharing occurs in this context with the criminal organizations, either willingly or under some form of coercion?
Yes, I absolutely do.
Okay.
I believe that the PRC has access to it.
Dr. Feldbach-Brown, you mentioned in your written testimony that China has made significant investments in South America and Latin America, and I'm concerned, as we talked about a moment ago, the ports, for example. Is it true that the contractual arrangements between port ownership often limit host country visibility into their operation?
Indeed, it is. I think there is some hope that can be and should be maximized through concerted action. Finally, this year, in October 2025, China signed the Ports Management Act, that is a legislation of almost 10 years ago, or international treaty, rather, of almost 10 years ago, that seeks to counter IUU fishing. And I think that's one mechanism, hardly the only one, to be pressuring for far greater transparency. But indeed, the lack of transparency, often built into contracts by Chinese entities, is enormously detrimental.
And what sort of risks does that pose, especially in the megaports of, for example, in Peru and elsewhere?
Well, there's a range of risks. In the most dramatic extreme case would be, of course, sabotage or preventing access to U.S. ships during times of conflict. But short of that maximalist dangers, it's simply providing detrimental advantages to, for example, Chinese businesses at the expense of U.S. or Latin American businesses. The possibility of espionage that you have correctly highlighted is another one. And I'm also concerned about selective approach to criminality, enforcing anti-corruption, anti-criminal measures only against some actors, while letting others, such as those that provide services to the CCP, without similar pressure.
And Mr. Donovan, I mentioned a moment ago the marijuana farms in places like Oklahoma and Maine, which I understand from my colleagues is a real problem for those states. And given the mixed up situation when it comes to a federal law, which makes marijuana a Schedule I drug, but yet the federal government's turned its gaze elsewhere while states have allegedly passed state laws, which I used to think were subject to federal supremacy, but only when the federal government actually enforces the law. What are the consequences of these Chinese-operated marijuana legalized? I'll use air quotes, legalized marijuana farms in places like Oklahoma, Maine, and elsewhere around the country?
The consequences have been over time that the black market marijuana production is through the roof with very little scrutiny. We're seeing billions of dollars in black market marijuana. By and large, there are many, many Chinese criminal groups that are now actively engaged in production, distribution, trafficking, and money laundering directly attributed to black market and illegal, state legal marijuana networks. So the issue I see at Senator is that we have to make this a strategic priority for the Department of Justice to go after these criminal elements, because it is not just about marijuana. We see those same groups that are moving billions of dollars in fentanyl, methamphetamine money on behalf of the Mexican cartels. These Chinese groups are being untouched. Money laundering has to be a priority again for us as a nation, and we have to hold them accountable, because when it's all said and done, the purpose of the Mexican cartels or any cartel is to generate profits and to make money.
And I think as we've discussed earlier, that these cartels, these criminal organizations are largely commodity agnostic. In other words, anywhere they can make money, they're not necessarily going to stop at quasi-legal marijuana farms in some of the states. Do you agree?
I do agree, and I would take it one step further. They are like any other criminal entity. They will engage in all different types of criminality, to include energy theft, gun trafficking, migrant trafficking, drug trafficking, you name it. It's one-stop shopping for any Mexican cartel. They're not limited to just drug trafficking.
Dr. Feldbach-Brown, do you have anything you could add?
Yes, some interesting evidence has come out about the illicit cannabis farms linked to Chinese criminal groups. Namely that they are often thought of as a easy, low entry point into the United States, with the expectations that law enforcement will be prioritizing going after them very low because of the fact that cannabis has become legal in many U.S. states. And so they are sort of the first opportunity to establish a foothold, to establish presence, learn systems, learn law enforcement, learn other dimensions that can become the springboard for other illicit activities. We are, for example, seeing an expansion of China-linked poaching, wildlife trafficking, and illegal logging in the United States, not just in Mexico and South, in the United States as well.
Well, we're coming to the end, but what I'd like to ask each one of you, what we can do about this problem. What are the policy options available to the Congress? I know, Mr. Lazarus, you mentioned tariffs when it came to the chemical precursors and dealing with China, but as we found out in the recent trade negotiations, when the Chinese have leverage with 90% of the critical mineral processing in the world occurring in China and threatening to deny us access to that, that provides them pretty effective leverage to try to negate any demands we might make upon them. But would you speak to that, or I should say, and any other policy recommendations you might have for us?
Well, Senator, on the other hand, when President Trump and President Xi met on the sidelines in South Korea a couple months ago, it was from that then President Xi agreed to add 13 more precursor chemicals to stop for the export to the U.S. and Canada and to Mexico. And so I think that, China listens to the language of economics, and so definitely tariffs should be used. And this idea, this threat should just be one of the key priorities that President Trump should absolutely bring up to Xi Jinping in China. So that's one. Two is there's got to be a no-kidding interagency task force stood up specifically tasked against Chinese organized crime, so that these networks don't fall behind or under the seams of law enforcement and intelligence. We've got to create an international task force around this, and we can rely on some Asian partners who've dealt with Chinese organized crime much longer than we have. Taiwan, Australia, Singapore, they can help us out with that. And again, we can leverage AI to create a dashboard that would allow law enforcement agents, whether you're in California or in Oklahoma or in Maine, you can see ties and connections between different transnational criminal groups and their ties elsewhere as well, so you can identify some trends. So I think if we do those three things or four things, I think we'll make some good headway in trying to get after these Chinese criminal networks.
Of course, one of the big problems we have when it comes to chemical precursors is many of these chemicals are dual use. I mean, there are legitimate purposes for which these chemicals can be used, but they can also be used for illegal drugs. Mr. Donovan, do you have any other suggestions?
Yes, Senator. So I believe the path forward for the United States is to get after the Chinese underground banking as it relates to our financial institutions, and to make that a priority for us as a nation. Ultimately, whether it's precursor chemicals or drug trafficking and other crimes, it comes down to revenue and profits. If we can work with our financial institution, our banks, to pull those networks out of our institutions, I think the U.S. will be a lot safer for it.
Thank you. Dr. Feldbaum-Brown?
Let me endorse that and also emphasize your two important insights, Senator Cornyn. One is that China has countermeasures, including in terms of tariffs, including in terms of denying purchases of